moral system tells you how to act and what to see, and a shared moral system keeps your emotions under control and fulfills your motivational needs. Now there's this old idea of David Hume's, and David Hume famously posited that you cannot derive an ought from an is, and what he meant by that was that merely knowing the objective facts about something does not tell you how to implement those facts in your life, and that that's actually a gap. Now you could say, and I think this is the case, that that's actually a necessary consequence of the scientific endeavor, because one of the things that you're trying to do as a scientist is to strip away the value of the object, right? Because I don't care what your idiosyncratic notion of the object is. I want to know how you perceive the object such that everyone else will perceive it at least that way, and so that takes the subjectivity completely out of it. And so it might just be a necessary consequence of the scientific method that it doesn't have a morality implicit in it. People argue about that. Sam Harris, for example, argues, he believes that we can come up with a scientific morality. I don't believe that, because I don't think that you can make rational judgments about value. It's too complicated. It's far too complicated. It's something that has to emerge. It can't be. I mean, Marxism was supposed to be a scientific utopia predicated on scientific principles and all of that, and you know, it just didn't work. Anyways, so I kind of buy Hume's argument that you can't derive an ought from an is. Now that's a problem. First of all, it's a problem because you have factual knowledge but you don't know how to implement it. You know, it's like, should you spend money on AIDS, or should you spend money on cancer, or should you spend money on higher education? How the hell are you going to calculate that rationally? You can't, because you just don't have the information at hand. It's not possible to, you know, I worked for a UN committee at one point, and the UN committee had like 100 proposals for how the world could be improved, but there was no order to them. It's like, it wasn't, you know, this was more important than this. It's like, well, that's the end of that. You know, you got to start with something, and so that means you have to make something more important than other things, obviously, in your life. If everything's of equal importance, then you're paralyzed. Now, you know, it's a truism, and probably an oversimplified one, that since the dawn of the scientific revolution, a wedge has been driven through the heart of our society, such that the moral systems that we use to unite us, so those would be religious systems fundamentally, have been subject to an intense critique from the scientists. And you know, it's a pretty effective critique. Even if you've maintained a traditional faith, it's like, you know, the scientific onslaught is no joke. And that's a problem, as far as I can tell, because, and the problem is that you're still left with the problem of how you should act. And Nietzsche, the philosopher Nietzsche, he would say that we're running on the fumes of Christianity in the West, because over its 1,000 years of domination, let's say 1,500 years of absolute domination, it produced a consensus of morality that was predicated on metaphysical presuppositions, and that organized societies, and those societies are predicated on certain beliefs, like the belief in, really I would say, that something divine inhabits each individual. You know, that's sort of the presumption that's embedded in law. It's sort of the idea that underlies the idea of natural right, right? There's something about you that's so valuable that even the law has to bow to it, even if you're reprehensible, even if you're convicted and reprehensible. Now that's, man, the idea that people came up with that idea, that's a bloody miracle. It's, you know, because generally speaking, your proclivity is, if someone's been even accused of doing something, the general human proclivity is that even if someone's just been accused of doing something terrible, that's enough so that you can stone them to death or do whatever you're going to do with them. Presumption of innocence before guilt, good God, of all the things that aren't automatic, that's got to top the list. You know, it's unbelievable that that occurs. And it's interesting to me because it seems to me that that presupposition that there's something valuable, transcendent about each individual, I wouldn't call that a scientific presupposition, but it seems to be a highly functional presupposition, right? I think, in that it isn't unreasonable to notice that societies that have valued the individual and made the law subject to the individual, even with regards to voting, because that's basically what voting does, it puts sovereignty in the hands of the people, those societies actually seem to work. Now, whether they'll work for the next 300 years, who the hell knows? I don't know, but they've worked pretty well for the last 500 years, let's say, and we've got it pretty good right now. And you know, I suspect most of you are rather pleased that the law recognizes your value as individuals, and you take that for granted, right? You think you have rights, and of course the rights that you have, natural rights, are logical consequence of your transcendent value, and that's nested in, this is Nietzsche's observation, that's nested in a set of metaphysical beliefs. And his idea was that if you wipe out the metaphysical beliefs, eventually you wipe out the whole system, because you've knocked out the cornerstone. And it might take a long time for the thing to shake and fall, but it will. Now, whether he was right or not is hard to say. It looks to me like what's happened since Nietzsche announced the death of God in, say, the late 1800s is that Western society has oscillated between extremes, you know, extremes on the right, Germany, extremes on the left, and you know, with the democracies, at least the other democracies, the democracies managing to stay the course somewhere down the middle. But it's not obvious to me that that can be maintained without the underlying metaphysics. And that's a problem, because whatever you might say about the underlying metaphysics, it's not true the way science is true. And that could be okay, because there might be more than one form of truth. In fact, I think there is. I think there's pragmatic truth, and I think pragmatic truth is actually deeper than scientific truth. And pragmatic truth is the truths that enable you to act in a manner that best, that improves the probability, roughly speaking, of your existence and your reproduction maximally. That's a Darwinian idea. And one of the things about the Darwinian theory, this kind of puts it in opposition to scientific materialism, I would say, is that the Darwinian theory is that you don't have privileged knowledge of the world. And you can actually tell that because you die, right? If you knew enough about the world, you wouldn't die, and you do die, and so you're an embodied theory of sorts, and that theory is good enough to get you along about 80 years and produce some reasonable probability that you'll have children and that they'll survive. That's it, man. That's what you've managed after 3 billion years of evolution. It's a good enough solution, it's a good enough way of acting, and we don't know a better way of acting, and our world conceptions are actually nested inside the Darwinian system, and they might be predicated on pragmatic truths rather than objective truths. Pragmatic truths are truths that have functional utility, and we're alive, we care about being alive, we tend to use our theories as tools. It's possible that our theories are tools, and that they're tools to help us stay alive. Now, I was reading a bit about Camille Paglia the other day, and I've noticed some similarities between, she's a famous gadfly, I would say, of feminists, of classic modern feminists, although she would regard herself as a feminist. unbelievably smart. Like if you want to watch someone who has verbal mastery beyond belief, you can watch Camille Paglia. She seems a little manic to me. She can wrap off an argument at a rate that's just mind-boggling, and it's very coherent, and she tends to shred her opponents in arguments. She's so brilliant. She said something interesting, and she's been influenced by some of the same people that I've been influenced by. She liked this book by Erich Neumann called The Origins and History of Consciousness, which I would recommend if you're interested in Jungian theory, Carl Jung. It's a good introduction to Jungian theory, and it's about the development of consciousness. And it's predicated, like Jung's work and Joseph Campbell's work and Mircea Eliade's work, all of which has been criticized or ignored by the postmodernists, predicated on the idea that human beings have a central narrative, and that central narrative is the dramatic expression of the necessary human system of values, and that's built into us. It's part of our nature. We have a nature as human beings. We're not infinitely malleable by culture, which is a postmodernist claim, and a dangerous one. It's dangerous if we have a nature. Paglia has this idea that the reason that you come to university and you study the humanities, or the proper reason if you do that, is not to engage in premature and destructive criticism of something that you don't even yet understand, but to learn as much as you can about art and literature and poetry and drama and fiction and religious thinking. And this is all a kind of a, you can think about it as a, what is that? What is all that? It's art, it's culture. Music belongs in that category. And like, what the hell, what about music? It's like everyone loves it, or almost everyone. It's a mystery. You listen to music and it's very meaningful. I mean, music gets people through some pretty dark times. Why? It's not obvious, that's for sure. And in most cultures, music plays a very central role in identity formation, and you guys, I think you'll probably find as you age that your favorite music will be the music that you listen to between the ages of 16 and 20. It's kind of like it imprints on you, and it defines maybe that defines a generation. And maybe, in our tribal past, and this is highly likely, when you were being inculcated into the tribal culture, that was inculcated with dance and with masks and with music all at the same time. So you're invited to participate in this drama and to take your place in this drama, and to think of that as a representation of the objective world is just not right. That isn't what it is. It's an invitation to a drama. Now then the question might be, well, is the drama real? And the answer to that is, it depends on what you mean by real. I think that great dramas are more real than real. They're hyper real. They're hyper real because they provide guidelines about how to act that are abstract and even perhaps generic, but applicable across an extraordinary broad range of situations. So imagine this, you get up in the morning, you do a bunch of things, and someone asks you what you're doing, what you did, and you tell them, well, the first thing I did this morning was open my eyes, and the second thing was think about whether I wanted to go back to sleep, and then I took off my blankets, and then I put my feet on the floor, and then I stood up, and I was blinking while I was doing all this, and I was also breathing, and then I looked for my clothes. And you really want to listen to that guy? You don't want to listen to that guy. It's like, why are you telling me that? I want you to tell me something interesting. Well, what is it that's interesting? And why isn't that interesting? It's not obvious. So then imagine the guy actually tells you a pretty good story, a little adventure. Probably he was doing something normal, something unexpected happened, he had to conjure up some new responses, and he either settled the problem or didn't settle the problem. Yeah, you're interested in that.